Hello everyone, it's Butter Bob, and today I want to give you a little video about keeping your diet simple. One of my favorite subjects that I go over and over. And you know the reason I go over and over it, because people really, they don't believe me, I don't think. They write to me and they say, I would like to know your whole menu plan, your detailed menu plan. And I have a hard time giving people that because when I was losing weight, I kept my diet extremely simple. Of course, it's not my plan. This plan of keeping it very simple is something that's been treated by doctors for decades, before I was ever born. Decades. In my video, Your Own Personal Diet Guru, you know there was a doctor back in the 1940s and 50s that had a basic, simple meal plan. He told people to eat about a half a pound of meat 3 times a day and add fat to that meat. You know that's a simple plan. It's hard to sell a diet book with it, but you know it works. You know keeping it simple works. You see, there was this doctor, and his name was Dr. Blake Donaldson. He was working with a very famous doctor when he was a young man who was a cardiac specialist. In fact, he was one of the person he was working with was one of the founding members of the American Heart Association. They were having a hard time getting their people that were in trouble to lose weight. And out of frustration, Dr. Donaldson, who lived in New York, went to the American Museum of Natural History to study bones and to learn what he could learn about the human diet. And he discovered something that was probably well known, but not to him, that people before the dawn of agriculture were mostly hunters. And they lived off the fattest meat that they could kill. It dawned on him that this simple diet was probably the diet that mankind had adapted to. And it would be maybe good for them. Decades later, this was in 1920, decades later in the early 60s, he wrote a book called Strong Medicine, which by today's standards, believe me, is offensive in some ways. It has some offensive stereotypes of women and different races. So I don't recommend the book. I want to read a little quote from Dr. Donaldson's book that he wrote, and it really tells why he recommended such a simple diet. He wrote, during the age when our ancestors lived by hunting, every weakling who could not maintain perfect health on fresh fat meat and water was bred out. Because of this, he goes on to say there are probably only 2 perfect foods: fresh fat meat and clean water. Whenever you are in a jam with the human body, it is well to go back to the common inheritance of mankind. And the ability to live well on meat and water is the common inheritance of mankind. And let me tell you how simple his diet was, and he treated people with it for decades. I mean, for decades. From the 1920s all the way up until he died in the 1960s, in the mid-60s. He recommended that people eat about 1.5 pounds of meat a day. And this is, I went and got these steaks. He recommended people eat porterhouse steaks. Well, I didn't get porterhouse. I got ribeye, and this is about 1.5 pounds, about 8 ounces per steak. And he recommended that people eat about 6 ounces of lean to 2 ounces of fat. That's somewhere around the neighborhood of what we got here. And he allowed them to have some black coffee and water. But he basically treated people until they were well, lost their weight or lost their diabetic symptoms or lost their arthritis, with a simple diet of eating meat 3 times a day. It's so simple. It's not a Butter Bob idea. It's just an idea. Remember, guys, what we're trying to really do is control our appetite. We are trying to use that fat belly as food. And this works well, and it gives you the protein you need. While I was editing this video, I remembered that I forgot to say one of the things that impressed me the most about Dr. Donaldson's diet plan was that he encouraged people, in fact he demanded that his patients get up in the morning and take a 30-minute walk and take time to shave and to bathe and do all the things they need to do before they ate breakfast. In other words, his diet plan had a element of fasting to it. It extended the fast in the morning, and he had the people on his diet do a 30-minute fasted walk every morning. Fasting was a part of his diet, whether he realized it or not. And I wanted to do this little reshoot to make sure this point brought out, because this is one of the things that really impressed me. And when I made the original video, I kind of forgot to say that. I think this really needs to come out. Sometimes we skip over some of these details. All his patients were encouraged to do 30 minutes of fasted exercise every morning. But guess what? Even Dr. Donaldson did not originate this idea of keeping it simple. In fact, there was a doctor that was around much before Dr. Donaldson was even born. And this is a doctor who you probably already know the name of, or at least you know something that he made, something that he invented, and his name was Dr. James Salisbury. And he's the inventor of the Salisbury steak. Salisbury steak. But not like this. If you're my age, you probably, when your mom was not feeling well, probably got one of these TV dinners served to you. And I hate to admit, but they actually taste pretty good, but they're not that good for you. But Salisbury steak was Dr. Salisbury's invention, but his story is so much better than that. And so let's just talk about Dr. Salisbury for a minute. Dr. Salisbury, in 1854, he got the bright idea to do an experiment on himself to find out which foods people tolerate the best. And I'm going to read a quote to you from his book, which I'm going to link to. This book is in the public domain. It's his experiments, and this is amazing, his story. And you can read it for yourself in the links to this video. Dr. Salisbury wrote, "In 1854, the idea came to me in one of my solitary hours to try the effects of living exclusively upon one food at a time. This experiment I began upon myself alone at first." Dr. Salisbury began by eating baked beans. He went on to eat corn. He ate asparagus. He tried different meats, one at a time, experimenting with different foods for over 2 years on himself. At the end of the 2 years, and this is something that you probably couldn't do in today's world, but he invited 4, 5, 6 men to come and live with him, and he fed them these solitary diets, same solitary diets he did, and saw how they affected them. He experimented with these men with these different things for another 2 years. And at the end of the 2 years, he went and purchased over 2,000 hogs. And he fed the 2,000 hogs this same diet. And he fed it to them until they become sick enough that they died. He dissected all those hogs to see what each food had done, because pigs seem to have a very similar digestive system to humans. So he wanted to see the similarities. Now this is something that's going to blow your mind, especially since Dr. Salisbury was an American. Back in the 1800s, there wasn't a Mickey D's on every corner. Hamburger was not the all-American food that it is today. But he discovered, after many years of experimentation, that hamburger, basically, he called it minced beef, was almost the perfect food for a human being to become healthy on. Pattied minced beef. He called it minced pulp of beef, which is basically a hamburger, was his diet of choice. And he fed people who were sick or fat or had different digestive problems, basically insulin resistance disease, what we call it now, metabolic diseases, a diet of exclusively of ground hamburger, making patties. That he told people to make the patty loose, put it on a fire, which we would call it grilling today, and this worked. The great American, and it's not exclusively American, I understand that, hamburger patty. I'm going to make a big one here. A big one. Look here. And he told people that they could put some, like Worcestershire sauce. It wasn't the gravy base that we have now, but he allowed them to use the juice off the hamburger to make, or he didn't call it a hamburger, to make some sauce for it or make a little soup for it. And this was the great American hamburger. And there's Dr. Salisbury. So the gist of this little video is this. A simple diet has been used for 150 years by doctors on tens of thousands of patients. Other doctors did too. There was a man named Alfred Pennington. There were different doctors down through history, especially here in the United States, who treated tens of thousands of patients with a very simple, monotonous, even boring diet. Mostly a meat diet. Hamburger. Steak. Chicken, even. The diet that I have recommended, simple diet, is not Butter Bob's diet. It's a diet that works. It frees you from the aggravation of trying to come up with a menu. It gives you something simple that has been tried. You know, we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time we come up with something. We can see what's worked for other people and go from there. And I'm going to tell you something, the best thing it does for you. It gives you a chance to experience success. And yeah, I believe, you know, I have a chili recipe. I have the ranch dressing recipe. I have different things that I allow in my diet. I don't believe in eating one thing only. But there's nothing wrong with keeping it simple most of the time. Watching your appetite get under control. Watching your body begin to use that big belly you've got for food. You know, that's the best food that you can get. The food that your body has already got stored. You know, and I don't recommend this either. But as I told you in my Why Do Fat People Get Hungry video, there was a man who fasted for 382 days. He lived on his own body fat. And I don't recommend that to anybody, to do that without medical supervision at least, especially if you're not really fat. This man was over 400 pounds. But it's possible to live at least a little bit every day on the fat you already have. Thank you for watching. Keep it simple. Use your own body fat. And don't forget to subscribe if you like this channel. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.
Back up. Stop. Come closer. Okay, stop.
So that line right there.
Yeah.
Many years later, decades later, he wrote a book called Strong Medicine. How did you know that? All right.
Because he's Google. You know that.
But I do recommend the fact that his diet was very good.
The freaking coda.
On the fat you already have. Thank you for watching. That was Chiquita jumping in her chair. Goodbye.